welcome back to my channel. Katie here from Salvaged by K. Scott. In this video, I'm going to be bringing you along with me as I take this outdated makeup vanity and turn it into two much more practical modern nightstands. This vintage waterfall style vanity was actually up on Marketplace for a few weeks before the owner gave up and set it out on the curb with a big old free sign on it. And it sat there in the beating hot sun and even through a few rainstorms before I picked it up. So if someone locally had wanted to scoop it up and use it in its original configuration, they had more than their fair chance. But because not very many people today have the need or the space for a big vanity like this in their bedrooms, when I find pieces like this, I like to split them up into two narrow nightstands. There is always a hot market for those. But the first thing that I need to do is get this thing separated into two individual pieces. I grabbed my drill and a bit to start unscrewing things, but that didn't fit, of course. So I switched out to a shorter Robertson screw bit, and that still didn't fit. So I went ahead and grabbed our impact driver, which is a little shorter than the drill and the short bit, and I was finally able to get in there and reverse the screws out. If I had a stubby Robertson screwdriver, that would have worked too, but I couldn't find one in the toolbox. At this point, I was pretty sure that I'd removed all the screws, and the rest looked like it was held together with nails and probably some wood glue. So I used my painter's tool and a hammer to gently start prying the drawer towers away from that middle drawer support so that I could at least see where all of the nails were. And slowly but surely, with some gentle coaxing of my hammer, I was able to remove the shelf and all of the drawer supports one little piece at a time. Now that I had my two individual nightstands, I could move on. I pried out all of the backer board nails before I had a chance to catch myself on one, and I also removed the crusty, rusty old feet. I was left with some holes on the inside of each tower, and I decided to start filling those with some 2-part epoxy wood filler. This product is very similar to Bondo. It is fast drying and super tough stuff. You mix together the base putty with a separate cream hardener and then apply it to your repair. And because these are so deep, I'm not going to worry about filling them all in this first pass. I just need to get it in there and start filling up these voids. I also have these gaps on the back inside corners. This is where the original mirror would have sat. So I went out to our shed and grabbed a piece of scrap wood, definitely from another piece of furniture at some point. And I had my husband cut it down to the right size on our table saw. And then we just attached these with a little bit of wood glue and a few nails. When that wood filler was dry, I sanded it flush with some 120 grit sandpaper on my Surf Prep sander. And like I said, it's definitely not perfect. There were lots of pockets and bubbles that still needed to be filled. And I decided to use some lighter weight wood filler to cover up those superficial spots instead of mixing up more epoxy filler. I also used my finger to push some filler into the joints on the fronts. They're not noticeable now between the wood grains, but once it's painted, these gaps are going to stick out like a sore thumb. When that was dry, I sanded it smooth again, and I used one of these Surf Prep foam abrasives to help me mold around all of the curves and trim details. Surf Prep does also sell these pads in a triangular mouse sander shape and also a round one for random orbital sanders. If you were interested in maybe trying these out, but you're not quite ready to invest in the whole Surf Prep system, that might be something to look into. I started to remove the hardware from the drawers when I realized that I got so excited about taking this thing apart that I totally forgot to clean it first. And obviously that needs to happen. So I used my shop vac to get the loose debris and a few tiny spiders. Did you see them in there? And then I used some TSP alternative to really scrub everything down well. While I was washing, I noticed that there were a few sections of veneer that were lifting up on 3 of the 4 drawers. So I used my box cutter to work some wood glue up under that loose veneer, and then I clamped it down to dry for a few hours. When the wood glue was dry, I switched out my sandpaper to a slightly finer 220 grit and carefully sanded off the original finish that was on those drawer fronts. It was pretty thin, so I got lucky and I didn't need to sand too much, didn't damage the veneer to get down to the raw wood. And while I was at it, I also used my sander to clean up some of the stains on the insides of the drawers. I'm going to be painting the bodies of these nightstands, so my next step is a stain blocking primer. I'm using a spray can of my favorite Bin shellac based primer today. This is going to keep any wood tannins from discoloring my new paint, and it's also going to create a cohesive surface between the original finish and the wood filler so that my paint will look the same over both. While my primer dried out in the garage, I brought the handles inside to the sink and gave them a good wash. And I also rubbed them down with some steel wool as sort of a scuff sand so that when I spray paint them, that paint will have something to hold on to. This champagne gold spray paint is a really soft shade that is going to look perfect with the rest of the design that I've got in mind. Once the primer was dry, I sanded it down with a very fine 400 grit sandpaper to make sure it was perfectly silky smooth, and I wiped away the sanding dust that created with a microfiber cloth. And since it is so hot and humid right now, I decided not to spray my paint like I usually do. With the temperatures where they currently are, the paint would be half dried by the time it came out of the gun and hit the furniture. So I brought these inside and I'm going to be brushing them instead. I chose the color Oyster Gray in Melange Paint's Artisan Mineral line and my Zebra 2-inch angled stubby brush. And like any paint, you want to make sure that it is thoroughly mixed before you dip your brush, so I gave it a good shake and then got started. This paint has great adhesion and it levels itself pretty well for a mineral paint. I like to brush several thin coats instead of trying to apply more paint and get fuller coverage in the first layer. That really helps a lot with minimizing brush strokes in the final paint job. But this is a hand painted piece, so it will have some brush marks, and that's okay. These are vintage pieces of furniture, artisan, one-of-a-kind pieces that are perfectly imperfect. And I'm not a factory. I can't produce a factory finish. I do the best that I can to get a beautifully finished product at the end, but I think it's important to give ourselves some grace when it comes to perfection on secondhand pieces like this. As my friend Jamie Ray says, done is better than perfect, and in use in someone's home is way better than in the landfill. I ended up brushing 3 total coats of paint, but I did sand in between the second and third coat with some more 400 grit sandpaper just to keep things as smooth as I could. And I did also tape off a straight edge for my paint to stop on the inside of these just so that it looked a little more finished. Next, I needed to deal with the drawers. I really wanted to keep and feature this beautiful grain pattern in the veneer, so I thought a whitewash would be the way to go. I mixed a little of my Oyster gray with some water and used a zebra fan brush to apply it over the wood. My first attempt obviously didn't have enough pigment in it to make any difference, so I added a little bit more paint until I got something that I thought would work. Usually with a paint wash like this, I brush on the watered down paint, let it soak in for a few seconds, and then wipe away the excess. When I did that though, all of the paint came off. Nothing had really sunk down into those wood pores. So I applied a second layer and let it dry without wiping anything back, hoping that the color would work its way down into the wood. But after it was dry, it was super blotchy, streaky, and I could see that it had just dried onto the surface instead of absorbing down into the wood like it should. That is definitely not the look that I want on these nightstands. So I brought the drawers back out to the garage and sanded the paint off. And I decided that I might be better off going with a traditional oil-based stain instead. So I applied a layer of wood conditioner, which is supposed to help stains apply more evenly. And then I did a coat of this Minwax white pickling stain. Let's just say that didn't work either. I have never seen this happen with an oil-based stain, but it fish-eyed and just beat it up on the surface. Not cool. So I wiped that stain off and also wiped the drawers down with some mineral spirits. I'm not sure why, but that was just my instinct. And then I turned to the Google. I found a really great blog post about why wood may not be taking stain and some things to try and get around that. I'll leave a link for that in the description box for those that are interested. But long story short, the recommended next step was to seal the wood with some shellac seal coat and use a gel style stain that is designed to sit on top of the wood instead of sinking down into it. I didn't have any shellac, but I did have this jar of Bear's new water-based stain in a white color, and it's kind of like a gel stain, so I thought I would give it a try and just see what happened. I brushed a coat onto one of the drawers, keeping my brush strokes in the direction that the grain was going. I should say directions the grain was going in. And after an hour, it was dry, it was adhered, and it was even looking. We have a winner. It just wasn't as opaque or pigmented as I wanted for this look, so I ended up applying 5 total coats to the drawers, but that's okay because it only takes an hour to dry in between coats and it was super easy to work with. To seal up and protect my new finish, I decided to use Bear's water-based polyurethane in matte. This was my first time using it, so when I poured it out into a separate container and saw this kind of pinkish hue, I was concerned, but I brushed it on over my light paint anyways, and it did definitely brush on and dry crystal clear. I did 2 coats over the bodies and the drawers of the nightstands, and then I put an extra coat on the tops. Once my clear coat was dry, I laid the tables down on their fronts on a soft blanket and nailed on some 1/8 inch plywood onto the backs. I got Doug to cut this for me out on the table saw again, but you can absolutely get the lumber associate at Home Depot or Lowe's to make these kind of cuts for you. I reattached the gorgeous pulls and gave the insides of the drawers a quick wipe down with some scented furniture salve, and now they are ready for their next stage in life. Thank you so much for hanging out with me again today as I flipped this piece It was a good reminder that things rarely go according to plan when it comes to flipping furniture. Please make sure that you are subscribed before you go. Leave me a thumbs up and a comment down below, and I will catch you guys next time.